teachers who have reported child abuse, what happened? I've done this more times than I can count, but without concrete evidence, it usually just gets brushed aside. There was one instance that sticks with me. A mother furiously yelling at her 4-year-old for gaining weight and growing too fast. All the kid did was follow the growth chart like any normal child. But the mom insisted she needed ADHD medication, claiming the girl was out of control. The poor kid sat in the same spot for 30 minutes, not moving or speaking. I remember the chilling moment when I realized she was so scared of her mother that she had sat there and soiled herself. The mom went wild, berating her for a full 5 minutes. I reported it, but nothing changed. Then there was the time a mother approached me, pale and shaken, saying her boys claimed their father was molesting them. It was clear she was in shock, yet she didn't report it. Eventually, the father ended up in federal prison and the kids were put into counseling. And you know what's bizarre? When you call those abuse hotlines, they demand so much information. They want to know the address where it happened, the date and time, the names of everyone involved, their social security numbers, their phone numbers, all the details. I never have all that. It feels like you're trapped in a twisted game, trying to save the innocent while the system just keeps spinning its wheels. This seems like a really tough situation to deal with. It's frustrating when reports don't lead to action, especially with kids involved. The details you have to provide can be overwhelming, but I guess they want to make sure everything is taken seriously. It's good that some cases do end up with proper help, but it's sad that others slip through the cracks. I remember a boy from my Pee-wee baseball team, no older than 7. He didn't just have a tough time on the field, it was much darker than that. Every time my dad, who was the coach, knelt down to talk to him, the boy would instantly cover his face with his small hands, as if anticipating a blow. Confused, my father asked why he did that. The boy's response chilled me to the core. "I thought you were going to hit me." Later, I learned the truth. His father was an abusive drunk. I still wonder if my dad ever reported it, but the image of that kid, so deeply conditioned to expect pain from an adult, lingers in my mind. It's a haunting reminder of the darkness that can exist behind closed doors. It's tough to see situations like that. Kids shouldn't have to deal with fear in what should be a safe space, like sports. It's a reminder of how much impact a parent's actions can have. That kind of conditioning can mess with a kid's mindset for a long time. It's hard to know how to help when you're just a kid yourself. It wasn't just a job. It was a nightmare waiting to unfold. I wasn't a teacher, just a nanny, but the weight of responsibility felt heavier than any classroom. My boss's 10-year-old niece lived on the other side of the state, and the shadows of her life were haunting. My boss knew her sister was lost to the dark world of meth addiction, but couldn't prove the little girl was suffocating under neglect. Every summer, we'd hope for a miracle, praying that those toxic parents would finally seek help. But the phone calls came with grim news instead. Slowly, the truth slithered out. The girl wasn't going to school, had lice feasting on her for ages, and her mother tossed her into dangerous places alone. The house was barren, just echoes of fights and desperation, while both parents spiraled deeper into the abyss, high on drugs. When my boss finally called CPS, it was a desperate gasp for air. They arrived, unearthing the horrors concealed within those walls. They told the father she had to go back to school, and like a puppet, he obeyed. But the cycle resumed, and soon my boss found herself dialing CPS again, her heart pounding in her chest. They arrived once more, and this time, they pulled her from that hellish home, not even sure what they found, just knowing they had to act. My boss raced through the night, her mind swirling with dread, meeting them halfway to rescue the lost child. When she finally laid eyes on her, the reality was gut-wrenching. 2 outfits that clung to a frail frame, a pair of shoes with holes that whispered of neglect. That was all she had left. Now, it's been a year. The little girl has found refuge, living with us, as her aunt desperately fights for her to be adopted. But I wonder, does she still hear the echoes of that chaotic life? Can she ever truly escape the shadows? That's a tough situation. It's sad to see a kid go through so much, The aunt stepping in and trying to adopt her seems like a positive step. It must have been hard for the girl before, but hopefully, she's finding some stability now. It shows the impact that caring adults can have in these kinds of scenarios. There was this summer when I worked as a nanny for a family that had 3 kids, a 10-year-old boy, a 7-year-old girl, and a 5-year-old girl. The dad was in real estate, the mom stayed home, and they lived in this massive multi-million-dollar mansion. It didn't take long for me to notice something strange about the middle child. Her parents acted almost like she was a problem that needed solving, attributing adult-like motivations to her that she just didn't have. Everything that went wrong seemed to be her fault. And it didn't help that the mom had this bizarre habit of bringing home gifts for the other 2 kids while totally ignoring her middle daughter. Whenever the girl got upset about being left out, her parents punished her for it, as if she was the one in the wrong. The other kids caught on too. They knew if anything happened, she'd be blamed. I'll never forget this one day when the 5-year-old decided to jump on her sister and shove her into the pool, fully dressed. I put the little one in timeout, and when she started crying, the mom came to see what was going on. When I explained what happened, her response was chilling. Well, what did the middle child do to her to make her act like that? Then, instead of addressing the behavior, she took the 5-year-old out for ice cream. After a couple of months, I couldn't take it anymore and quit. I even called the police to report the emotional abuse happening to that little girl, but as far as I know, nothing ever came of it. I continued babysitting for them occasionally, and it's like the whole situation faded into silence, leaving me haunted by the thought of what was happening behind those grand walls. It's pretty messed up how the parents treated the middle child. They put all the blame on her and seemed to ignore her feelings. It's not right to reward the youngest for bad behavior while the middle child just wants to be included. Quitting the job and reporting it shows the seriousness of the situation. It's unfortunate that nothing seemed to come from the report. I remember a night that still sends chills down my spine. I worked as a paramedic, and there was this house we kept getting called to over and over again. Each time, we found a small boy, maybe 4 or 6 years old, with strange injuries. It didn't make sense. After a year of these visits, my partner and I decided something had to be done. We suspected something sinister was happening behind those walls. Then came the day when the father showed up at our station. He was furious, banging on the doors, screaming. The others inside were terrified, warning us not to let him in. We chose to ignore him, hoping he'd just go away. But an hour later, as we opened the garage to head out on another call, there he was, blocking our way with his car, demanding answers. We didn't engage. It felt safer to retreat behind the locked doors of our office, protected by our RFID keys. Our hearts raced as we called the police, and they arrived to deal with the situation. While the abuse case against him was serious, what got him charged that night was harassment, harassing paramedics trying to do their job. It was a dark reminder that sometimes evil hides in plain sight, behind a door that looks just like any other. Sounds like a really tough situation. It's hard to see a child in that kind of environment, and the response from the father adds a layer of danger. It's good that you and your partner took the right steps to protect yourselves and report it. It's important to prioritize safety, both for you and the child. Looks like the system worked in this case, at least to some extent. My parents were terrible, but it escalated in middle school. I mentioned my situation to a teacher I trusted, unaware of mandatory reporting laws, and she contacted the authorities. That Wednesday of spring break still haunts me. A cop arrived, casually explaining he was there for a report of possible child abuse. My mom, with that spine-chilling, deadly quiet voice, insisted everything was fine. She would never hurt me, she said. The cop turned to me, lecturing me about how lucky I was to have discipline from parents who cared. No harm was done here, he asserted. But after that day, the repercussions were far worse than anything I'd endured before. Even now, I can't comprehend how they thought that was a suitable way to handle things. It's tough to hear about situations like that. Seems like the authorities didn't handle it well, and the outcome just intensified the issues at home. The whole idea of discipline can really get twisted. Not being believed by someone who should help can leave deep scars. It's understandable that you still reflect on it, Sometimes people just don't get how things really are. There's something about summer camps that's supposed to be all fun and games, but sometimes darkness creeps in. One summer, while I was a camp counselor, I encountered a chilling situation that I'll never forget. It started with two brothers who seemed out of place. On the very first night, they whispered to me, low and hesitant, about their father. They said he beat them right in front of their cabin where all the other kids could see. At first, I played it cool. I didn't want to scare the other campers, so I steered the conversation away. But when I spoke to the boys individually later, their stories grew darker. The things they revealed about how their father treated them made my skin crawl. I knew I had to do something, so I reported it to the camp authorities. What happened next was something I never expected. A representative from social services showed up, a stark difference to the carefree atmosphere we tried to maintain. It was the first time anything like that had happened at our camp. As they took the brothers aside for questioning, I felt a chill run down my spine. Sometimes, beneath the laughter and campfire songs, there are shadows hiding painful truths. It's good that you took the situation seriously and reported it. Sounds like a tough spot to be in, especially with kids involved. It's necessary to make sure they're safe. The fact that social services got involved shows you handled it right. Not every camp situation is easy, but protecting those kids was important. It's a heavy thing to witness as a counselor. I have to file child abuse reports on a regular basis. Some of them are about cases from the past, but even if they've been handled, it's crucial to document them. You never know when a parent or client might falsely claim that someone made a home visit. I work with many immigrant families too, and there's often a glimmer of hope that CPS can guide parents. The way they raise children in their homeland can be so different from what's accepted here, especially regarding discipline. Strangely enough, just having a government employee visit seems to be enough to stop the abuse in many cases. In the years since I started this job, none of the kids in my program have been taken away from their homes, which is a relief. But what really gets to me is how people view CPS. They think we're just waiting to tear families apart. I met so many who believe that as a mandated reporter, I actually enjoy breaking up families. It's infuriating. Thanks for letting me share that. It sounds like you have a tough job dealing with sensitive issues like child abuse. It's good to hear that there hasn't been any removals since you started. The misconceptions about CPS can be really annoying. It's important for people to understand that the goal is usually to help families, not just to break them apart. Venting can help process those frustrations, so it makes sense. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was just a kid battling a terrible cold. One side of my face looked like it belonged to Rudolph, all red and inflamed. It was a normal day at school until my teacher pulled me out of class. He looked worried, his eyes scanning my face like he was searching for a hidden truth. "Are you okay at home?" he asked, his voice low and serious. I was too young to understand, too naive to see what he saw. I shook my head, confused, not even realizing how alarming I must have looked. He leaned in closer, almost whispering, "Did your parents hit you?" Those words sent a chill down my spine. I felt mortified as I assured him I was fine. When I got home, I couldn't help but tell my parents about it, thinking nothing of it. But when parent-teacher conferences rolled around the following week, my parents made a point to thank him for his concern. They knew he was just trying to protect me, opening a door to a world where things could be much darker. In that moment, I realized how easily someone could reach out for help, even when they didn't know they needed it. It's good to see a teacher looking out for students like that. Even if it turned out to be nothing serious, it shows that he cared enough to check in. It's important for kids to have adults in their lives who are attentive and willing to step up. Props to your parents, too, for supporting that kind of vigilance. Definitely helps create a safer environment for everyone. I grew up attending a predominantly white, affluent school. In first grade, there was this girl named Michelle. She was pale, with stringy brown hair, and a scent that lingered in the air, one that made people cringe and whisper behind her back. It was cruel, and I felt pity for her. So I approached her, offered friendship in a world that clearly rejected her. But then, one day, she just vanished. I remember that morning vividly. I was excited to show her something new, but she never showed up. Our class had a substitute teacher, as our regular one was on maternity leave. I asked him what happened to Michelle, but he just deflected, his eyes darting away from mine. Years later, I found myself in his class again. A few friends and I confronted him, eager to know what had happened to our lost classmate. That's when he opened up about the night Michelle stayed over at a friend's house. Dinner had been odd, and when bedtime came, her lack of hygiene raised alarms. Michelle confessed that she and her brother only bathed once a week and sometimes went to bed hungry. That's when the friend's mom called Child Protective Services. By morning, Michelle's grandparents rushed over from Oklahoma to take her and her brother home. They learned that their mother had been lost in her own struggles, neglecting her children. Their father? Absent, vanished just like Michelle. After that day, Michelle disappeared from my life, and I've always wondered what became of her. I don't have the yearbook from that year to even recall her last name, but her story lingers with me. Just one of many secrets hidden behind the masks we wear in our comfortable lives. That's an interesting story. It's tough how some kids end up in bad situations due to circumstances beyond their control. It's nice to hear you try to be there for Michelle, even if it didn't last. The whole thing with CPS really highlights how important it is for people to look out for kids who might be struggling. It makes you think about the impact that even small actions can have. I wasn't a teacher, but I was one of the people who got thrust into a nightmare situation. Back then, I was serving in the military, working as the command legal officer. You see, being part of the military means things are a lot different. There's a set of rules called the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which enforces stricter punishments than you'd find under civilian law. So, when a horror unfolded, it was serious business. The details? They're enough to make your skin crawl. While I've witnessed some unimaginable sights during my time in Afghanistan, what I came across here was just as chilling. The military ended up charging the perpetrator with over 380 counts of unspeakable acts. But when it came time for justice, the military judge hesitated on handing down the death penalty. The reason? The other parent, the one not serving in the military, attempted to share the blame for the grotesque situation. In the end, the sentence amounted to 60 years to life, a mere shadow of the darkness inflicted. It's a tough situation. The military system handles things pretty strictly, so seeing that many charges is shocking. The judge's hesitation on the death penalty adds another layer to it. It must be hard to deal with these kinds of cases, knowing the impact on everyone involved. A long sentence like 60 life feels heavy, but at least there's some measure of accountability.